Welcome to the Adventurous Podcast. I am your host, Brittany Bigley, and I am very excited to be hosting this first episode, Fear versus Intuition. I'm talking with my friend Jennifer Kelly. She is an esoteric therapist who is trained in somatic processing and yoga therapy. She will be helping me to explore how fear and intuition show up in our body and how we're able to distinguish the difference. If this episode resonates with you, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and share it with at least 3 of your friends. If you have questions or comments, please be sure to head on over to theadventurous.org, theadventuress.org for similar content. The idea for this episode first came to me while on an ice climbing trip out in Ouray, Colorado with my adventure partner, Tim. Still feeling the stoke after experiencing my first ice fest, I asked him to join me on an ice climbing trip out there in their ice park. It was a 6-hour car ride from Colorado Springs, Colorado. It was there in the car ride where I first noticed that a sense of something might be wrong. It was a small sense of knowing, so tiny that I dismissed it as pre-adventure jitters, my typical nerves, anxiety, irrational fear that I experienced before any trip or adventure. Driving into Ouray in the early morning hours, the lights from the hot springs still illuminated the still darkness. I checked in with myself and noticed that the small sense of knowing continued to get stronger the physically closer we got to the canyon. The next morning, walking back from breakfast, I had the sense to ask Tim, hey, do we need anything from Ouray Mountain Sports, the gear shop that's on Main Street? He declined, so we decided to go into the park entrance and gear up. Harness, boots, crampons, ice tools. I had a sense to look down and take notice of the difference between my Black Diamond monopoint crampons and his Camp dual point crampons. My monopoint crampon, protruding from my big toe, was much longer than his 2 dual point crampons. Had I not been a complete noob, I would have had the complete sense to march back down to Ouray Mountain Sports and get him the correct crampons. But in my ignorance, I naively followed Tim into the canyon. The ice park in Ouray is a winter wonderland with perfectly manicured ice walls flowing down the rock face of the Uncompahgre Gorge, tucked between 13,000 feet snow-capped peaks. We carefully maneuvered past the anchors along the walking bridge and schoolhouse and hiked our way into New Frontier. Setting anchors and rappelling into the canyon, Tim was eager to go first, so I let him. He climbed 20 feet up the ice. When he went to kick in with his foot into the ice, his crampon popped off and went careening down into the ice. I looked around and became acutely aware that we were those unsafe noobs in the canyon. Swallowing our prides, we decided to walk out of the canyon, walk out of the ice park, down to Ouray Mountain Sports to buy Tim some proper crampons. Fortunately, the only thing for us that was hurt that day were our egos. But this experience had me thinking, had I been able to distinguish my fear versus my intuition, could I have prevented a potentially dangerous and very embarrassing situation from happening? Could this skill be taught to other climbers and adventure enthusiasts to help them ensure their safety while taking calculated risks? So now we're going to chat with Jennifer Kelly, the esoteric therapist, and we're going to get her take on how we can distinguish fear versus intuition in the body, and if there are any tools or tricks that she can help us that we can tap into our intuition while out adventuring or even just in general everyday life. Hi, I am talking to Jennifer Kelly, who is an esoteric therapist who is trained in somatic processing and yoga therapy. Jen, thank you for being on the first episode, Fear versus Intuition. I know we've talked about this for a while, so I'm very excited to actually be manifesting this with you. Thanks for joining me.
It's my absolute pleasure.
First things first, I think the listeners would like to know, what is an esoteric therapist and what is somatic processing?
So esoteric therapy is a term I kind of came up with on my own, using the idea of esoterica in the way that I use dream interpretation, guide communication, tarot, palm reading, many of the different divination arts I use in conjunction with therapy to better help my clients.
And what is somatic processing therapy?
Somatic processing therapy, also called somatic trauma resolution, is a relatively new therapy created or discovered by Peter Levine back in 1997. And it is, the way I describe it to most clients is it's like talk therapy for your body.
I mean, I know why I asked you to be on this podcast, helping me to distinguish fear versus intuition. But why would you say that being trained in somatic processing therapy, like why would this make you an expert in, tapping into your intuition or identifying fear?
Right. A lot of the work that I do on the other side of my therapeutic bar, the esoteric side, I really have to be able to trust my gut and to trust myself when I tap into my psychic ability and I tell a client that their cousin Dana might be listening in. I really have to listen deep within myself and not have that self-doubt get in the way in order to find that information. I'm not always right, but when I am right, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah. So, what is intuition? Like, in your own words, how would you describe that?
Intuition hits different people in different ways. Some people feel it very much in their body. If they're connected with their body, they'll feel it like a gut punch. Some people express to me that they'll get tingling in their arms or legs when their intuition arises. Some people feel it more in a way that's hard to describe. It's more like feeling a disturbance in the force, or your spidey senses tingle. It generally happens, when we go down a dark alley or into the basement. We might feel a similar feeling when our intuition spikes. But again, it depends on, how well you listen to your intuition and if that connection is severed or not.
Would you say that intuition for different people shows up differently? And like maybe even with the same person, could their intuition come to them in different ways, different modalities, even like with different situations that they encounter?
Absolutely. Every person is individual. Every person's going to experience it differently. What I find in my work a lot of times is people have quieted the voice of intuition for so long that they don't really know its voice when it does whisper to them. And part of the way that happens is, as children, we are encouraged to ignore our intuition so many times. I'm sure every person has had that experience of, I don't care if you don't like that ugly sweater, go give grandma a hug. You are taught by your parents and by society to go against what you know to be true and do what is proper and accepted and expected of you. So that quiets the voice of intuition. So if you had, a perfect little child that was never taught that, their intuitive voice might look drastically different than anybody we see today. But because it is such the social norm to quiet your intuition, oftentimes that nudge has to find another avenue. And so that's why a lot of times, especially working with the body and somatic work, getting still and really listening to the body can be a huge obstacle for many people, because just getting to that point is huge. It's unsafe oftentimes for people to be in their bodies. But for those that are safe to be in their bodies, to listen to this voice that is sometimes foreign can look different depending on the circumstance. I feel like I've got a pretty good line on my intuition, but depending on what happens, it shows up in different ways. And it can be a literal voice that I hear in my head. It can be a sharp pain. It could be a twinkle of light trying to get my attention to turn one way or another. I've had all variety of intuition show up for me personally.
Okay, so if there's someone who's like a listener who's thinking like, yeah, I've had those instances, maybe they've even had those instances and gone against it, or had those instances and listened to it, how would you help them in your practice to like tap into that intuition, to help them to listen and really hear it?
I would first invite them to, think of a time when they did have intuition, whether they listened to it or ignored it. They had that moment where they thought to themselves, maybe I should stop. Maybe I should call that person. Maybe I should slow down right now, whatever. I invite them to remember a time when they had an intuitive spark, and then to locate, where was that? Did you feel it in your heart? Did it feel like a tap on your shoulder? Was it goosebumps all over your body? What was it? And then to hone in on that body felt sensation to let that be their guide. So that if
Okay.
it was goosebumps on their body, then pay attention next time you get goosebumps on your body.
Okay. And just for kind of tying my story into the interview. So there were multiple times where in the car ride, I had this small sense. And I would say it wasn't a body felt sensation necessarily inside of my body. It was more of a feeling the energy outside of my body that was saying that there's like, it was like a small poke. And I use this as like a small poke that then goes into a larger shake until you can't ignore it anymore. This has happened to me multiple times, and you'd think I'd finally learn to recognize it, getting better. But yeah, so it's just this outside sense of knowing that then really becomes a lot more of like a definitive knowing. I think like in the stories, like I can look back on it and being like, that was my intuition telling me, like nudging me, ask that question, notice that difference.
Right. Well, and then I would encourage you to also look at the other side of that coin of what kept you silent. What was it that made you not speak up and say, I think we should stop at this store right now? Was it that you didn't want to be a bother? You thought he knew more? You were being nice? Which of those silenced you? Because that's the other side of this coin.
I think that's a really great point. I think this being my second ice climbing experience and Tim being a very knowledgeable adventurer, like he's on search and rescue. So, you know, has had multiple times where he's like performing these rescue operations, like whether it's winter time, you know, summer, but like he's just very knowledgeable about outdoor safety. So I think definitely it was like, you know, I don't want to look stupid or I don't want to sound stupid. You know, absolutely. I think that's a great question to ask. I didn't even think of that. So we've talked about intuition. How about fear? What would you say? Because now like somebody can be like, oh yes, I remember that sense. Let me figure out where that is in the body. Would you say that the same way that you're trying to tap into your intuition, that they can also identify fear in their body?
I do think that they can. Fear and intuition are such different animals. Intuition is such a gentle nudge that comes from deep within us. Fear, however, is built into our cellular makeup. It is in the oldest part of our brains to keep us safe. They've shown that some fears can even be passed down through the bloodline. So fear is such a different animal than intuition that, you know, it's kind of hard to find the correlation, but finding, finding fear within your body of what it feels like to be afraid. What kind of fear? You know, are you afraid for your physical well-being? Are you afraid of the future of what's coming up? Are you afraid to be seen? Are you afraid to be heard? Are you afraid of not being seen? Are you afraid of not being heard? Fear is so multifaceted. But again, it's that coming into the quietness of being with yourself that you can really find the delineation between the different kinds of fears. And, you know, potentially work through them or listen to them and, you know, jump out before the car explodes. And often fear and intuition can go hand in hand, but a lot of times fear is here to protect us and fear can lie to us. Intuition normally does not lie.
Hi. So if I were to like replay this scenario of me going to Ouray with Tim, what, like maybe a little bit of guidance, like what could I have done? Like definitely in the car ride as I'm like feeling this, like tapping into that more, like, yeah, just maybe like a little bit of like, how would you go about maybe retraining myself to tap into this intuition?
So part of it again is finding what kind of intuition was it? How did it feel for you? And then doing baby steps to rebuild that muscle. To tell your intuition, okay, I heard you and I'm listening this time. I'm going to stop or I'm going to turn left. The more that you do that, the more the connection is realigned and reattached. So what I would do for you is next time you hear that tiny little nudge, to say out loud to yourself, I hear this intuitive part of me, or whatever verbiage works for you, but I hear this intuitive part of me that says I'm not supposed to go to that party, so I'm not going to go. And then notice what that's like for your body. And then you can hopefully differentiate, like, is it fear keeping you from the party, or is this an actual intuitive nudge? Like I said, the intuition voice has been silenced for everyone for so long that it sometimes takes a little bit of coaxing and trust to rebuild that within ourselves. And that sounds, dualistic, because my inner voice is me, but having severed that connection, it's almost like trying to get an injured animal to come trust you to get help. There's so much distrust there that it takes a little while to rebuild the connection.
So this is not a practice that happens overnight. It's not like all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm listening to my intuition and it's, bam, 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 like it's coming to me. This is a continual, almost like yoga and meditation. It's a practice. Like you have to continually practice to use this muscle.
I would never give it an all or nothing answer, because if anything, if I've learned anything from doing this work, it's that there's always an option that somebody out there can snap their fingers and be fixed. I've seen it happen. But for most people, I would say, yes, this is a relearning of listening to the intuition and then following its guidance, and then listening again and then following its guidance. And then, you can even test the waters depending on the risk and get an intuitive nudge and decide not to follow and see what happens. But yeah, I do think it is a slow, it's like building a new muscle. You're not going to start lifting 200 pounds. You got to go slow and get to know it and then build up from there.
Great. And then speaking of practice, I know that in our notes, I asked you if you had, if you could come up with any kind of like meditation or guided meditation for our listeners. I don't know if you did that. If you didn't, that's okay. But I was wondering if you could share anything to just kind of help get that practice started.
Okay. If I understand you right, like get a practice for building that intuitive line back up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, can I practice on you?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead and use me.
Okay. So I want you to just visualize yourself back in that car. Was it day, midday, evening?
Would you like me to say this out loud?
I would, yes.
Okay. In the car driving, it was after work, so it was dark.
It was dark.
Into the morning hours, yeah.
Into the morning hours, okay. And do you remember the first intuitive nudge?
Yeah, I think it was actually probably before the car. It was like packing.
Okay, when you were packing. And what did you notice? Was it an idea to be careful, or what was the narrative?
Yeah, it was just, it's so hard to explain these little nuances, but it was just, so one of the places that I feel my intuition is in my solar plexus. So it was kind of like a solar plexus feeling, but then combined with an outer awareness. Mm-hmm. But again, it was a very small, like, poke. Mm-hmm. And then as I'm packing and getting ready, going into the car, meeting up with Tim, getting into his car, we're driving. That nudge or that sense, like, almost felt like closing in. And as I'm physically getting closer to the canyon, like that sense, like, felt like physically getting closer to me that something's wrong as well.
Okay. And if you were to draw me a picture of what that sense appeared like, what color would you use? What did it feel like?
Ooh, okay. This may take a moment.
That's okay.
And just for the listeners, if this is okay with you, Jen, I'm going to share this. So Jen and I go into her practice. She's my therapist, but this is very common between you and I, what we do. And a lot of times, if I can't get the sense right away, I ask you to ask the question again. So please go ahead and ask the question again.
Okay. If you were to draw this sense, that nudge that you had, what color would you use?
I think it was a blue.
Okay.
Like a deep blue.
A deep blue. And is it deep blue also in your solar plexus, or is that just that outer line?
No, it'd be in my solar plexus as well.
Okay. Does it have a temperature or a texture?
It is it's a colder feeling, and I don't know if this is cliche because it's like I'm going ice climbing, but it's cold and it's also like an empty feeling as well.
Okay, cold and empty feeling, and it's blue, dark blue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is this feeling familiar to you? Would you recognize it if you felt it again?
Yes.
Okay. And does it feel safe enough for your body?
No. I think that's what I was picking up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of unsafety.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And did your body recognize that as unsafety at the time, or did your body not know what it was?
So I think this is where it comes back to your question of knowing, but then dismissing, and reasons why we dismiss. And I think I have been told multiple times of like, stop being afraid, because it's like, yes, it's a risky scenario, but it's like mitigated risk, right? Like, we have ropes and anchors and everything set up. And if you do it properly and you know how to do it, it's safe, but there's always like some risk involved. But I think I've just been told over the years, maybe by like different partners, or maybe even just I've gotten the sense of like, stop being afraid, just do it, like whatever, it's not a big deal. So I think that is what I started to dismiss as like, you know what, this is just my nerves. This is just anxious feeling, So yeah, I think it goes back to that dismissive and like, why did I dismiss it? Because I've been told repeatedly over and over again that, it's not that big of a deal. Just go climb.
Okay. And so I'm going to ask your logical mind to come on board here. Is it that big of a deal? Should you be afraid of falling off of a mountain in the ice, even if you have everything right?
It is a big deal. And I think it's something, even professional climbers have made very small, minute little mistakes big enough to end their life.
Absolutely.
And I think that something that we as the climbing community need to be aware of and take a little bit more acknowledgement of that. And I think sometimes we do. I think, especially I would say in Ouray, people are double checking as they're walking by to make sure anchors are properly done, like make sure people are properly belaying. So I think, there are some people within the community that really take that to heart, but it can turn into life or death real quick.
Absolutely. I mean, the chances of me falling off my couch and dying are very, very minimal. That's why I don't do ice climbing, because that fear button is very intact for me with that. And so I think one thing with this, really quick, is that fear of safety of your life is in your hind brain. There is no talking yourself out of being afraid. No matter how strong the person is, you would have to do thousands and thousands of countless hours retraining that fear in order to override it. So what we normally do, because it's in the hindbrain, there's no logic. It's the same part of your brain that's keeping your eyes blinking and your lungs pumping and your heart beating right now. You have no choice in these things, just like you have no choice to be afraid of falling off of a mountain. What we tend to do is to silence the fear, we shut everything down. We silence everything. Even hunger, need to urinate. I'm sure any of those signals have a hard time getting through when you're in that mode, because you're powering through the fear. And so you shut down all signals.
So would that include then intuition?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Because intuition, like I said, is a different animal, and it's this quiet, whispering little voice. Fear is shouting through a megaphone. So if you are closing down the megaphone, you think you can hear a whisper? Hell no, especially if you're not trained to listen to that whisper.
So my next follow-up question then, would it be like to stay present enough? Because as an ice climber, like you have to push through that fear to get to the top of the climb, right?
Absolutely.
So then are you trying to then stay present enough where you're feeling the fear and you're still allowing your intuition to come online?
Absolutely. And I think it is that presence of mind that is key here, because I think that's when mistakes are made, is when we're trying to push so hard through the fear that we're not really present with ourselves. So the next time you are climbing on an ice, and because I know you as well as I do, I would encourage you to either talk it out loud, literally out loud to yourself, or have an inner conversation with yourself and with your fear. And to speak to your fear and let it know, okay, yeah, we just got higher than we were before. I hear that you're afraid we're going to fall off of this, but I want you to see, look, I've got this rope attached, and look, I'm going to pull on it. It's secure on me. I'm going to look at the anchor that's next to me, and I'm going to verify that that is properly done. I'm going to look down at my shoes, make sure everything that is keeping me safe is proper and working. And that's not overriding the fear. That's addressing the fear head on and letting it know, like, I heard you, and yeah, this is a risk, but look at all of these measures we're taking to be nice and safe, and those are all completely intact. So this is just aligning to safety in the midst of fear. Because fear is going to happen no matter what. But you mitigating the fear makes it okay. So having that little reality check, that little talk with yourself, my old teacher said, I need you to meet me in reality here and just check in. Okay? Do you mind if I tell you a quick story of
go ahead.
When I did this?
Yes.
I have horrible arachnophobia. Even the cute little tiny jumpy ones will make me scream and want to run away. So a couple of months ago at the beginning of quarantine, my kids went out to play and my husband was gone. And my dog is playing with a gigantic brown spider. And I'm afraid that my dog is going to get hurt. So I now need to intervene. I can't just let this spider exist in my bedroom anymore. And nobody is around to help me. Because normally I call out, somebody else takes care of the spider for me because it makes me literally physically ill. So I'm talking out loud to myself about how to mitigate my safety. How to capture this spider safely. How to keep my dog away from it. And it probably took me a good 40 minutes, if I'm honest, of talking myself through each step and, putting the cup on the spider and then needing to walk into the other room and deal with my nausea, deal with my chills, talk myself down once again, and then go back in and really have, a plan of how to capture this gigantic spider and how to keep my dog safe. And I did it, but I really had to talk myself down and be like, okay, listen, Jen, it's just a spider. I know every instinct you have in your body tells you to leave this house, but you can't do that right now. You have to handle this. And because you care for creatures, you're not just going to kill it, you're going to capture it. And I'm sure if anybody stopped in at that point, I would sound like an entirely crazy person. But the point is, I was able to do it successfully. And now, just the other day, there was a little spider on my chair outside, and I didn't have the visceral reaction to run away like I used to. It actually healed part of my trauma to work through the fear and to talk myself back into reality of realizing I'm hundreds of times bigger than this thing. It's not going to attack me. You're okay.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you said that as a strategy to like help mitigate, because when Tim and I first started climbing together, and we first started learning how to set anchors and make sure everything was safe and clean anchors, we would actually talk each other through it. And it was actually a safety check, more or less, so that he knows what I'm doing up top as I'm cleaning. But I guess in a sense, it also made me feel a lot more comfortable because now I'm also double checking. And I didn't know it, but I was talking myself through all of the safety checks to mitigate that fear, which is very interesting. Like, intuitively we were doing it.
Absolutely. Well, and that helps on another front too, within the brain. The part of the brain that holds our vocal processing is a completely different part of the brain than the part of the brain that thinks of the words. And so to send the process through the vocal channels and to find words to express how you're feeling literally changes the chemistry in the brain. So that once was a problem you were just thinking about, if you speak it out loud, it goes into your problem-solving center. And now once you've spoken it, you can find an answer in a much different way than if you just thought about the problem.
Jen, I wish I could talk to you for hours, and I'm sure you are going to be back multiple times on this podcast because you just have a great way of explaining things, and I think you have a whole lot of knowledge on many different topics that. But I really appreciate your insight into intuition and fear and how it shows up, and I think our viewers or listeners will be able to take some of these skills and use them either while they're adventuring or, in their day-to-day. So I appreciate it. And thank you for coming on.
Absolutely, honey. My absolute pleasure.